Welcome back. We are continuing on with our creative writing lesson where we are looking at Ray Bradbury's stylistic choices and how we can imitate his style to improve our own creative writing. So this lesson we are looking at atmosphere. We'll look also at syntax, dialogue, sensory imagery and figurative language. So first up, let's look at atmosphere and let's remind ourselves what atmosphere is supposed to do in stories. So atmosphere is all about conveying emotions and feelings in a scene. And the writer does that through their descriptions of objects and how they describe the setting. The function or purpose of atmosphere is to create an emotional effect. It makes a literary work lively, fascinating, and interesting by keeping the audience more engaged. So that's why we would like to enhance the atmosphere. Now, in some stories, the atmosphere is more important than in others. You can really enhance the interest of your writing, particularly if you're creating a gothic text, a mystery, horror, speculative fiction. You can really enhance your story by using atmosphere in a really purposeful way. So we're really thinking about how we can purposely and intentionally improve our writing through using these, being aware of these techniques and using them well. Let's look at these example from All Summer in a Day. A few cold drops fell on their noses and their cheeks and their mouths. The sun faded behind a stir of mist. A wind blew cool around them. They turned and started to walk back toward the underground house, their hands at their sides, their smiles vanishing away. A boom of thunder startled them, and like leaves before a new hurricane, they tumbled upon each other and ran. Lightning struck 10 miles away, 5 miles, a mile, a half mile. The sky darkened into midnight in a flash. You can see in this scene the mood here shifts from the joy and the euphoria that the children were experiencing when the sun came out. And once the sun is hidden behind the clouds, and once the children realize that that's it, Ray Bradbury completely changes the atmosphere and returns to the gloom and the dismal feeling that we started with at the beginning. So let's look at what is actually creating this atmosphere. So when we're looking at atmosphere, remember we're looking at words that are going to convey emotion or feeling. So in the first sentence, a few cold drops fell on their noses and their cheeks and their mouths. The sun faded behind a stir of mist. A wind blew cool around them. They turned and started to walk back toward the underground house, their hands at their sides, their smiles vanishing away. So in some situations, you can have adjectives that convey the feeling, but you can also have the verbs that convey emotion as well. The actions are just as effective as conveying emotions as the adjectives. So with those details, in this section, we get that sense of disappointment. And the atmosphere is therefore an atmosphere of not necessarily regret, but it conveys this, with those references to cold and to fading. It's that receding joy and that diminishing happiness, and now it's returning to that sense of dread, that sense of sadness and disconnection. And then the next paragraph, through the actions, the actions become a bit more heightened with that a boom of thunder. So a boom of thunder startled them, and like leaves before a new hurricane, they tumbled upon each other. Lightning struck 10 miles away, 5 miles away, a mile, a half mile. The sky darkened into midnight in a flash. So now the atmosphere drops even more to not just feeling a sense of sadness and dread and disappointment, but now it's plummeted with that action. So when you get words like tumbled and darkened and flash, they all convey that darker feeling. Out there in the cold water, far from land, we waited every night for the coming of the fog, and it came, and we oiled the brass machinery and lit the fog light up in the stone tower. Feeling like two birds in the grey sky, MacDunn and I sent the light touching out, red, then white, then red again, to eye the lonely ships. And if they did not see our light, then there was always our voice, the great deep cry of our foghorn shuddering through the rags of mist, to startle the gulls away like decks of scattered cards and make the waves turn high and foam. So again, there's references to cold, the repeated reference to fog, the colour grey, lonely, deep cry, shuddering, mist, startle, gulls, even just because they are grey as well. Okay, these are all creating that atmosphere. It's a desolate, isolated, grey and dismal environment. Okay, so let's return to this scene. Last lesson I asked you to write a sentence about the setting. Now I want you to have that sentence in front of you, and you are going to rewrite it, but with still describing the scene and the setting, but I want you to change some of your descriptions so that you are enhancing the atmosphere. So try to use one or more of the following with your nouns: drops, mist, wind, thunder, lightning, your adjectives: cold, cool, dark, grey, verbs: faded, blue, boom, tumbled, darkened. I've deliberately selected these words from Ray Bradbury's descriptions because these are going to convey a very distinct atmosphere. It's an atmosphere that is like his ones in the Foghorn, where it's, and also in All Summer in a Day, where the atmosphere is gloomy, it's full of dread and disappointment, or it's got a sense of mystery there. So here's my example to give you an idea of what I want you to do. Cool leaves tumbled as the cold wind blew. Ferns, trees, grasses reached out to the dim, fading light. Calls of birds echoed overhead. Then there was silence. In the distance, the boom of thunder rolled towards him. He could hear the tat, tat. Okay. So you can see what I've done there. I've rewritten my description of the setting. I've added in more details to convey a particular setting. So you have to really think about what atmosphere you are wanting to create here. And by choosing an atmosphere of dread, of sadness, isolation, or wonder, amazement, claustrophobia, any of those. Think of a feeling that you want to convey in your scene and then use your details to create that. So hit pause and write your scene, and then I'll see you for the next part of our lesson. All right, we are going to now look at syntax. And remember, when I refer to the word syntax, I mean how writers use their sentences. We think about long and short sentences, simple, compound, complex sentences, and we also think about how they structure their sentence themselves. How they're beginning their sentences, how are they using punctuation within those sentences. So really it's often the mechanics of their structure. Let's have a look at this example here from The Sound of Thunder. Safety catches off, everyone, ordered Travis. You, first shot, Eccles. Second, Billings. Third, Kramer. I've hunted tiger, wild boar, buffalo, elephant, but now this is it, said Eccles. I'm shaking like a kid. Ah, said Travis. Everyone stopped. Travis raised his hand. Ahead, he whispered. In the mist. There he is. There's His Royal Majesty now. The jungle was wide and full of twitterings, rustlings, murmurs and sighs. Suddenly it all ceased, as if someone had shut a door. Silence. A sound of thunder. Out of the mist, 100 yards away, came Tyrannosaurus Rex. It, whispered Eccles. It. Shh! I want you to see how Bradbury has structured his sentences to create that sense of anticipation and tension. He hasn't, in this really tense scene, the tense part of this scene, he hasn't written really long paragraphs or sentences. He's kept it really short and concise. So you see even the here. Ah, said Travis. Okay, that's all. Everyone stopped. Travis raised his hand. Ahead, he whispered. In the mist, there he is. There's his. See how they're all really short. And then we have a little lengthening here, but then it drops back down to being quite short. And then super short, silence. Okay, and by having one word, and it's a standalone paragraph, okay, that word silence is its own sentence and in its own paragraph. And that really enhances the tension. This is the highest point in this scene. A sound of thunder. Okay, and then it lengthens out again. See that? So we have a bit of dialogue to propel the story forward and to get a sense of how, you know, I guess what the characters are doing. So he doesn't need to describe for us what people are doing. The dialogue is telling us that. And then we're now seeing, okay, they're getting ready. And then he decides at this point, I'm just going to stop the pace of this scene. Everyone stopped. Okay, pause. And then he creates more action, but he slows it down. Travis raised his hand. It's a very small detail. And so he is slowing the action down. And interestingly, you can see with those descriptions of the setting how the environment is creating that tension as well. The sounds. Suddenly it all ceased as if someone had shut a door. Silence. A sound of thunder. And then the action speeds up again. So we're thinking about the building, and then it slows down, and then it builds up again. See that? That if we sort of plot the action on a graph, that's what he does. And he does that through his sentence structures. through having short sentences, through having sentences that stand alone. So he really crafting. So you imagine that you've written a whole scene here, and then you've got to take stuff out in order for that to happen. Sometimes we overwrite and we feel like we have to describe a lot of detail all the time. But you've got to work out when it's time, what part in your story needs the detail, and what details aren't important. This scene is also a great example of Bradbury's dialogue. So remember, we looked at dialogue earlier, and dialogue in Ray Bradbury's stories bring his stories to life. The dialogue, as I mentioned earlier, moves events forward and reveals the feelings and motivations of the characters. There are no long conversations, but the dialogue is full of emotion. So really stop and think about how Bradbury uses dialogue to powerfully reveal those situations. So if we look at remember we looked at this opening to All Summer in a Day. Ready, ready, now, soon. Do the scientists really know? Will it happen today? Will it? Look, look, see for yourself. Okay, very simple scene, not a lengthy conversation, but it still conveys the emotions in these characters. We understand. Punctuation, questioning, creates emotions. Exclamation marks convey emotion. Even just the repetition, look, look, ready, ready. Okay, very, very carefully he crafts this moment. And in dialogue also, it's moving the action forward. So see how they're saying at the beginning, ready, ready, now, soon. And then they have a comment about, well, is this really going to happen? And then here, look, look, see for yourself. Here we have a comment about the action that's about to happen, or it's taking place right now. So you can use your dialogue to move the action forward. You don't have to have the narrator describing all the action all of the time, but you do need to make sure that what you're saying is clear and it's easy to follow. So you've got to be careful of when you might inadvertently create jumps and gaps in your narrative, and so it's confusing for the reader. Now, it's your turn. Come back to your scene. I would like you to think about how you can create tension in your scene through your syntax, through the way you're using sentences. So think about using short sentences such as everyone stopped, silence, long sentences, so create it using complex sentences at times, prepositions out of the beneath, under, overhead, verbs, ordered, whispered, adjectives suddenly, now. So for example, cool leaves tumbled as the wind blew, ferns, trees, grasses reached out to the dim fading light, calls of birds echoed overhead, then silence. Get down, Finlay ordered. What? Shh! Grabbing Tom's sleeve, Finlay yanked him down. He crashed through the ferns onto the forest floor, landing hard on his shoulder. In the distance, a boom that seemed like thunder rolled towards them. Stay down, Finlay whispered. Slowly, Tom reached up and pulled the leaves down that obscured his vision. He peered out, scanning the scene. Suddenly, out of the dense, dark forest, he heard the tat, tat. Okay, so I've taken my scene and I've expanded it. Can you see how now by thinking about creating tension, I have thought about what action could occur in this scene, and then I've tried to use my syntax and my dialogue to create that tense moment. So I'm using short sentences to create pauses, to slow the action and build tension. I use longer sentences to release the tension, develop and propel the action, and this enhances the speed of the scene. So think about how you could bring your story to life with carefully crafting your dialogue as well, and so that the dialogue can also move things forward and reveals the feelings and motivations of your characters, so then you're also enhancing your characterization. So pause now, and I'd like you to rewrite your scene using your syntax to create tension and manipulate the pace and to keep the action moving forward. Use dialogue as well. See how you go. Now we're going to move on to sensory imagery. In the kitchen, the breakfast stove gave a hissing sigh. Outside, the garage chimed and lifted its door to reveal the waiting car. So when we refer to sensory imagery, remember, what are we referring to? Right, we're referring to sound, we're referring to sight, smell, taste, and touch. Looking at these examples here, where can you see the use of sound? We can see it here, a hissing sigh, and that repetition of the S enhances that sound, and that is sibilance. The repetition of the S sound is called sibilance. Outside, the garage chimed and lifted its door to reveal the waiting car. Chimed, another sound. An aluminium wedge scraped them into the sink, where hot water whirled them down a metal throat, which digested and flushed them away to the distant sea. The dirty dishes were dropped into a hot washer and emerged twinkling dry. So we have a mixture of senses here. I wonder what you can find. We've got sound, scraped, whirled. I want to say flushed, but I'm not sure about that. Twinkling as well. And what about tactile, the sense of touch? I would see that in hot. In some ways, I would see it with the metal throat and digested. And again, another reference to hot and dry. We also have visual imagery. Visual imagery is conveyed through the adjectives, and also I see visual imagery as also being conveyed through the verbs. So we have some adjectives here: dirty dishes, and they were dropped and emerged. So you can see here there's quite a lot of imagery being created, and you can see that he's not just relying on the image of not just relying on visual imagery, but he's also drawing in other senses, sound and touch. And that's when, by drawing on more than one sense, he's really heightening that experience for the reader. The garden sprinklers whirled up in golden founts, filling the soft morning air with scatterings of brightness. They're really, really vivid. Whirled up, golden founts, soft morning air, scatterings of brightness. But then they always awoke to the tatting drum. The silence was so immense and unbelievable that you felt your ears had been stuffed or you had lost your hearing altogether. So by conveying sound through metaphors, Bradbury is able to really capture that experience. And when a writer does it in a way that's really detailed, it allows us to better understand the experience. And when we can better understand an experience, we can picture it in our heads, we can feel it, we can smell it, and we have a greater connection to what's going on. They sat in the ancient wilderness. Far birds' cries blew on a wind, and the smell of tar and old salt sea, moist grasses and flowers the colour of blood. So here you can see again the use of sound and the smell and the visuals. Sound, smell, sight. He did not move, eyes shut. He waited, shivering. He heard Travis breathe loud in the room. He heard Travis shift his rifle, click the safety catch, and raise the weapon. There was a sound of thunder. So here, it's quite important for this action that the sound is really in focus here. So he heard Travis breathe loud in the room. He heard Travis shift his rifle, click the safety catch, and raise the weapon. Interesting here is Bradbury's use of threes. Sometimes you'll find when you're writing that you'd like to enhance a really pivotal moment, and you can describe that moment in 3 consecutive phrases like this. Okay, so now it's your turn. Look at your scene that you've written previously where you reworked the syntax and the dialogue, and I would like you to enhance the experience of your scene through sensory imagery. So I want you to think about sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. Here's my example. They stood in the ancient wilderness, leaves tumbled as the cold wind blew, boughs groaned, aches of old age. Ferns, trees, grasses reached out to the dim fading light, brushing his sleeve. The smell of damp and decay filled the soft morning air. Calls of birds echoed overhead. Then silence. Get down, Finlay ordered. What? Shh! Grabbing Tom's sleeve, Finlay yanked him down. He crashed through the ferns onto the forest floor, landing hard on his shoulder. In the distance, a boom that seemed like thunder rolled towards them. Stay down, Finlay whispered. Slowly, Tom reached up and hesitantly pulled down the leaves that obscured his vision. He could hear Finlay's raspy breath. He peered out, scanning the scene. Suddenly, out of the dense dark forest, he heard the tat-tat and a scraping of metal. So you might notice how I've changed this a little bit, and I've incorporated some more sensory imagery. So my previous scene wasn't too bad. It did have some good description, but upon reflection, I felt that I could enhance little moments a little bit more. But I was very careful to not overly describe in sections where I wanted to keep the tension really tight. So here I wanted to make sure I didn't have too much description, that I wanted to keep my sentences short, and then I wanted to build up the scene again here. So look at your scene, look at how you've described it. How could you change it? How could you enhance your writing so that you're mimicking Ray Bradbury's use of sensory imagery? And you can see in my writing here, I have borrowed some phrases from Bradbury. This is just an exercise in improving my creative writing. This is not a piece of brilliant writing that I'm going to publish. So don't worry too much about borrowing phrases from writers when you're just practicing and improving your skill. So pause the presentation now, give yourself some time to rework your scene and think about how the sensory imagery can be used to capture that experience more vividly. But be selective. Think about what senses you want to use. You don't need to use all 5 in one scene. Often, you can see in Bradbury's descriptions, he only uses 3. And sometimes he just uses 2. So have a go and see what you can come up with. We're going to turn now to look at figurative language. So remember, when we talk about figurative language, we are referring to metaphors. We are referring to, let me see if I can just change that so it looks a bit more obvious, similes and personification. That's what we're going to focus on. Okay, so thinking about figurative language and how Ray Bradbury has used it, I want you to think about how you can use figurative language, similes, metaphors, and personification. So take your scene again, look at it. I know I'm getting you to do a lot of rewriting, and I know that that could potentially frustrate a lot of you. But hopefully you're beginning to see how important it is to keep redrafting and rewriting, because you constantly are changing and shifting in how you see your own work. And it's forcing you to stop and think about how you're writing and why you're writing it, and what can you change to make it better. And if you don't do this, you don't ever improve. So have a look at my example. They stood in the ancient wilderness. Leaves tumbled as the cold wind blew. Ferns, trees, grasses reached out to the dim, fading light, brushing his sleeve with each soft, cool sigh of the wind. The smell of damp and decay filled the dank morning air. Its heaviness hung thickly, almost as if it were a sheet, enveloping, protecting them. Calls of birds echoed overhead, sentinels calling and answering. Then silence. "Get down," Finlay ordered. "What? Shh!" Grabbing Tom's sleeve, Finlay yanked him down. He crashed through the ferns onto the forest floor, landing hard on his shoulder. In the distance, a boom that seemed like thunder rolled towards them. Tom could feel the shuddering, rumbling beneath him, like the earth awakening, attempting to shrug him off. "Stay down," Finlay whispered. Slowly Tom reached up and pulled the leaves down that obscured his vision. He could hear Finlay's raspy breath. He peered out, scanning the scene. Suddenly, out of the dense forest, he heard the tat-tat of a scraping he heard the tat-tat and a scraping of metal. Tom held his breath, listening and watching. Silence. So you can see here that I have enhanced my descriptions at some points, but not at others. At some points I've taken things out that I felt like didn't need it. It wasn't adding anything to my scene. And in some points I wanted to enhance the setting a little bit more. I felt like there wasn't enough of the setting and atmosphere, that I wanted more. I wanted the setting to be a bit more alive. So I added more things to it. So you can see the cool sigh of the wind. The damp and decay filled the dank morning air. Its heaviness hung thickly, almost as if it were a sheet enveloping, protecting them. I had calls of birds echoed overhead already, but I wanted to enhance that idea, that image of the birds interacting with each other and interacting with the environment. So I extended the image, sentinels calling and answering. I have further down a boom that seemed like thunder. I already had that. I wanted to, again, enhance the setting a bit more. Tom could feel the shuddering rumbling beneath him, like the earth awakening, attempting to shrug him off. And you can see I've made a typo. And then because I've slowed the action down a little bit here with my added description. And I'm not sure whether or not that is a good thing or not. So I decided that because I did that there, that down here I needed to create more tension. So I then added a little bit more here to I guess refer back to the silence, pause more, and then I can increase the tension again, so that, and then I'll release that tension with some action. So this is what I've come up with. I want you to see what you can come up with yourself. Hopefully you'll come up with something much better than me. I'm sure you will. Some of you are much better writers than I am, but I just wanted to show you an example so that you get more of an idea of what I'd like you to do. So hit pause and rewrite your scene, adding in figurative language. So how did you go? Look back at your writing, look back at each one and have a look at your progression and see what you have ended up with. Is that better? Have you managed to capture the scene how you envisaged it in your head? I'll show you my progression. Let's have a recap how I went. So this was my first sentence. The green velvet leaves of the ferns reached out to the dim light, calls of birds screeched overhead. And then I progressed a little bit further. Cool leaves tumbled as the wind blew. Ferns, trees, grasses reached out to the dim fading light, calls of birds echoed overhead. Then there was silence. In the distance, the boom of thunder rolled towards him. He could hear the tat-tat. And then you can see it's extended more. This is where I wanted to create the tension with my syntax and my dialogue. And then at the end, this is what I came up with. So you can see here the beginning. That was my starting point. Does my starting point look like my end point? Not really. And that is good because my starting point wasn't that good. But you can see that by going through that process, my scene has developed and I've refined it and I've made it better. And so hopefully you found the same experience. You found that you were able to add detail where you needed it. You were able to create and build the tension, propel the action, slow the action down, enhance the experience for your reader through the sensory imagery. What I'd like you to do is I would like you to take a photo of each of your paragraphs, each of the activities that you did, so I can see the progression from your first description through to your last one. So take a photo of each one, and then I'd like you to submit that to the due work so I can read over it. I prefer to do it this way because I'd like you to just do a little bit of handwriting, and I'm finding that OneNote has become a little unreliable. So for now, just take photos of your work and submit it to due work. Thank you, and I will, don't know when I'll see you, but you'll hear from me next lesson. Please also let me know whether or not you find this form of doing your lessons, if that is helpful for you, whether it works or not. I'm really keen to make sure that this works really well. So I'd like to know if it is working, what I can do better for you, and just to let me know what else I could possibly be doing. It'd be great to hear from you, and I'll hopefully hear from you soon.